He gave water to a giant Zulu girl. Next day, 300 warriors surrounded his lodge. By the time the sun dropped behind the black line of spruce, his throat burned like sandpaper. The day had been nothing but the snarl of saws, the grunt of axes, and his own breath smoking in the frozen air. Caleb turned the spigot on the water barrel, watched the thin stream catch the last light, and cupped his hands beneath it. His fingers were split and raw. The cold bit into every cut. He drank anyway. The water was iron cold, sharp enough to make his molars ache. He let it run down his wrists, washing away pine dust and sticky pitch. Behind him, the camp settled into its usual groaning. Men shuffling toward the cookhouse. Boots in the packed snow. A horse blowing out a white cloud in the dimming yard. Someone coughed hard, spit into the snow, then laughed it off. The sky above the pines went from blue to a deep, bruised violet. He turned to go back to his lodge and almost walked into her. She stood at the edge of the packed yard, where the snow lay untouched and clean. Taller than any woman he had ever seen. Taller than most men in camp. The last smear of light picked out the strong bones of her face and the height of her shoulders. A wool shawl, too thin for this country, wrapped tight around her. Under it he saw a dress meant for softer weather, torn at the hem, darkened with old mud and travel. Her eyes fixed on the water barrel first, then on him. They were dark, careful eyes. Not begging. Measuring. The wind shifted, carrying her scent toward him. Smoke. Salt. A faint hint of something like dried herbs. Not from here. Not from these woods. Caleb's own lodge stood 20 paces behind him, a squat shadow with a curl of smoke fighting into the cold sky. He was supposed to go there, light the lamp, count the tally marks in his little book, and think about nothing. Instead he said quietly, "You lost." She looked past him at the camp. The bunkhouses. The horses. The tall white men wrapped in canvas coats and worn flannel, hunched with the cold and their own private worries. She did not flinch at any of it. Then in thick, careful English she said, "Water." The word came harsh from a dry throat. Her lips were cracked. A sheen of ice clung to the ends of her braids. He stepped aside, hands still on the spigot. "Help yourself." She waited, eyes on him, as if some old habit demanded permission twice before trust could move once. He turned the spigot again, held his hands out for her to see, then stepped back. She approached with a slow, heavy grace. Up close she seemed even taller, her shoulders broad, her posture exactly straight despite the cold. Her hands were calloused like a laborer's, scars crossing knuckles and palms. She cupped the water, drank fast, spilled some on her wrists, and hissed softly as the cold bit into her. She drank again. And again. Each time, he watched the tension in her throat as she swallowed, watched the way her eyes flicked around the camp, taking in every angle, every door, every man who bothered to look up. Someone behind him muttered, "What in God's name?" Boots crunched on the snow. Caleb didn't turn. She wiped her mouth with the back of her hand. "Thank you," she said. The vowels came round, heavy, from somewhere far south of this forest, from a land of sun and dust and bare hills he had only ever heard about from missionaries and traders with tired eyes. "Where you coming from?" he asked. She let the question hang in the cold air. Then she tapped her chest lightly. "Nandi." She gestured south into the black wall of trees. "Ship. Town. Men." Her English snagged, thinned. "I go. Oh. Long days. Cold." She pulled the shawl tighter as if suddenly remembering. Caleb nodded slowly. He had heard stories. Ships that went farther than good sense. Contracts inked on paper the workers could not read. Women taken as servants to rich houses, then cast aside when fortunes turned. Some wandered with whatever remained of them. Some just disappeared. He had never seen one walk out of the timber like this. "You can't stay in the yard," he said. "Foreman won't like it." She lifted her chin a fraction. "I go," she answered. But her gaze lingered on the barrel. Caleb looked toward the cookhouse. Already eyes were turning. Rough, tired men starved of anything new. Any hint of a story. The last thing she needed was to become that story. "You eaten?" he asked. Her nostrils flared at the word, like a horse catching scent of grain. A flicker of something moved through her eyes and vanished. She did not answer, and that was answer enough. He jerked his head toward his lodge. "Come." She hesitated. The distance between where she stood and his doorway was not long, but it was strange ground, watched by hard faces and sharper gossip. Somewhere in that hesitation she weighed all of it. Then she walked after him without another word. They crossed the yard. The men went quiet as they passed, their talk falling away in little torn pieces. Some stared openly, heads tilted like crows. Others pretended not to look, their glances flicking and retreating. Caleb kept his eyes forward. He could feel the foreman's gaze burning between his shoulder blades from the office window. Inside his lodge, the air turned warmer, touched with wood smoke and the tired smell of a man living alone. Pine walls rough-hewn. A narrow bunk. A table made from an old sled. Tools stacked in one corner, boots under the bed, a single oil lamp on the wall. She ducked to enter, though the doorframe was still high enough for most men. The room seemed to shrink around her. Caleb shut the door against the wind and the stairs. He hung his coat, then nodded toward the stool by the table. Sit. She remained standing. Her eyes scanned the room, pausing on the axe in the corner, the rifle above the door, the small wooden cross nailed beside the window. She finally stepped nearer the stove, holding her hands out to the warmth. When she turned her palms to the firelight, he saw the scars more clearly. A cut running the length of her thumb. Another across the heel of her hand. These were not the marks of a house servant. You from the fighting? He asked softly. Her jaw tightened. She kept her hands toward the stove. Men come, she said. Red coats. Big guns. Fire. She lifted one shoulder in a slow, heavy shrug that tried to make the memory small. We go. We fight. We lose. Many die. Her English frayed, she had to tug it back together. Then ships. He thought of the newspaper scraps that reached them weeks late. Names he could not pronounce. Battles and places that sounded like songs. He wondered how many lives fit between those lines. She finally sat, resting on the edge of the stool as if ready to move at any moment. Her eyes followed him as he went to the shelf, took down a tin plate and scooped from the pot on his stove. Thick bean stew left over from midday. Not much but not nothing. He added a heel of bread, rough and dark. He set it before her. For a second she simply stared. Then she looked up at him, searching his face for the cost he would name later. When she saw none there, her shoulders eased, barely. Eat, he said. She did. Fast at first, then slower, as if each bite needed to be believed. She had a soldier's way with the spoon, efficient, controlled. When the bread met her tongue, she closed her eyes for the briefest moment, the muscles in her jaw going taut with something like grief. He leaned back against the wall, arms crossed, watching the snow creep across the small square window. What brings you this far north? He asked. Most folk head south to the cities. Factory work. Warm rooms. Men in town, she said between careful mouthfuls. They drink. Look at me. She mimed a hand grabbing a wrist. Say, you come. I say no. She shook her head, that thick braid swinging. Then I walk. Where there are no men like that. Caleb's throat tightened. You picked the wrong place, he muttered. This camp is nothing but men like that if you catch them on the wrong night. She nodded once. But they fear you, she said. The word startled him. He frowned. Fear me? I'm just another hand. She tilted her head. You give water, she said. You say, come. You do not ask, price. Her gaze flicked toward the rifle over the door. Men who are good with guns. Men who live alone. Others fear. He almost laughed. It came out as a rough exhale instead. I'm not a good man with a gun, he said. I just carry one because this place is lonely. She ate the last of the stew, scraping every bit. When she finished, she set the spoon down with care and folded her hands, fingers interlaced, resting them lightly on her knees. I sleep, she said. Then go. He hesitated. There was no spare bed. Just his bunk. The floorboards were hard and drafty. A woman alone in the timber with no coat, no gun, and no map would last a night or two at most. Take the bunk, he said. I'll take the floor. Her eyes flashed with something like annoyance. I sleep on floor, she said. Long time. I know how. I know, he answered. But you're half frozen. And I'm used to getting beat up by this place. It won't be new. They regarded one another for a moment. Wind pushed faintly at the door. The stove ticked and popped. At last she stood and went to the bunk. Sat on the edge, testing the give of the straw mattress. It squeaked under her weight. She lay back, still wearing the shawl, boots on, hands crossed on her chest like a soldier resting with one eye open beneath the sky. He spread a spare blanket on the floor by the stove and lay down, shoulders and hips already protesting the planks. He blew out the lamp, leaving only the red eye of the fire. In the dark, he heard her whisper something in Zulu. A string of soft syllables shaped by a tongue that belonged to warmer air. A prayer maybe. Or a memory. He closed his eyes and tried not to think about how the camp would buzz tomorrow. How the foreman would call him in. How the men would smirk and joke and let uglier thoughts slip through their teeth. Sleep came late, restless and shallow. He woke before dawn as he always did, to the sound of his breath mingling with the faint hiss of the fire. For a moment he forgot. Then he turned his head. The bunk was empty. A cold patch on the straw showed where her body had been. The door stood latched from the inside. No footprints, of course, on his floor. She had gone while he slept, quiet as snowfall. He stood, joints complaining, and opened the door. The world outside was midnight blue. Snow had fallen lightly in the night, smoothing away the camp's rough edges. The yard lay still. Smoke rose from the cookhouse. Somewhere a horse stamped. Then he saw the footprints. They led from his lodge toward the trees. Deep impressions, wide and long, striding away with a calm, unhurried purpose. No stumbling. No hesitation. Something else lay in the snow by his doorstep. A carved bead, dark and polished, the size of his thumbnail. He bent, picked it up. The wood was warm from where it had slept against her skin for years, or from his own imagination. A tiny pattern ran around its circumference, hash marks, triangles, a language he could not read. He closed his fingers around it. The foreman called him in an hour later, just as the sky paled. Caleb sat in the wooden chair across from the desk, hat in his hands. The office smelled of ink, pipe tobacco, and a bitterness old as the man behind the desk. She was seen, the foreman said, not bothering with greeting. His beard was flecked with gray, his eyes sharp and pale. Tall woman. Darker than anyone we've got on the payroll. Walked through the yard like she owned it. She didn't own anything, Caleb said. Except the clothes on her back. The foreman's jaw worked. You brought her into your lodge. Caleb said nothing. Do you know what kind of trouble that invites? The foreman went on. You don't know who's looking for her. You don't know what claim some traitor has on her papers. If any. She left, Caleb said. Before dawn. She won't be trouble to you. The foreman leaned back, chair creaking. You are trouble to me, he said. The men talk. They see you taking a stranger like that, they start thinking this camp's a charity house. Or worse, they start wanting one of their own. Caleb's hands tightened around his hat. She was freezing. Hungry. I fed her. That's all. That's not all, the foreman said. Not anymore. Take a look outside, boy. When Caleb stepped out of the office, the yard was no longer still. They had come without a sound, as if grown up out of the snow itself. Men. Rows and rows of them standing among the pines beyond the bunkhouses, dark shapes against the white ground. Some held spears with blades that glinted coldly. Others bore old rifles and carbines, slung easy on their shoulders like tools. Their cloaks were thick, patched together with fur and wool, layered over garments that did not belong to this climate. Some wore necklaces of carved wood and bone. Some had scars drawn across their cheeks like lines on a map. Caleb counted the first row. 10. The second. 10 more. Farther back, the line blurred into a dark wall of bodies and breath. 200. 3. More than this camp had men. At their center stood Nandi. She had shed the thin shawl. Someone had given her a heavy coat, too big in the shoulders, belted tight at the waist. Her braids were bound up with new beads that clacked softly when she turned her head. Her face was set, calm as carved stone. The camp men had gathered in a nervous knot by the cookhouse. Some held axes. Others bore their own rifles with the familiarity of war or hunting. Their voices ran low and harsh. What are they? Someone whispered. Indians from out east? Hell no, another muttered. Look at them. Ain't no tribe like that here. They're hers. The tall one. The woman at Caleb's place. Caleb walked past them, feeling their looks cling to his back. He heard the foreman calling his name, more command than plea. He kept walking. He stopped 10 paces from where the snow ended and the dark line of warriors began. The air between them felt heavy, as if held taut by invisible ropes. Breath smoked from both sides, rising into the same cold sky. Nandi stepped forward out of the line. The men behind her shifted, spears lifting a finger's breadth, rifles angling slightly. Not in threat, not quite. As if a muscle somewhere in the body of them all had twitched. Caleb saw now that some of the warriors wore bits of red cloth sewn into their coats. Old uniform scraps. Others carried British bayonets mounted on different rifles. The past clung to them in pieces and metal. Nandi stopped 3 paces from him. Close enough that he could hear the faint creak of her borrowed coat when she drew breath. You gave water, she said. Her English was clearer now, as if the words had been smoothed overnight. Or as if she had chosen them carefully on the walk back to her people. I did, Caleb answered. His voice sounded thin in the cold air. She glanced at the bead in his hand. He hadn't realized he still held it. His fingers had closed around it so tightly his palm ached. "You kept that," she said. He looked down, opened his hand. The bead lay there, dark and small and heavy with meaning he could not touch. "You left it," he said. "I left it as my word," she said, "that I would return." A restless murmur ran through the men behind him. He could feel their fear like heat at his back. "What do you want?" he asked. She straightened. Her height made him feel for the first time in years like a boy. "We are far from home," she said. "South is blood. South is chains. North is cold." Her eyes flicked over the camp buildings. "But north has trees. Work." Caleb swallowed. "You came for work?" She nodded once. "We fought for a king who lost," she said. "Then for a queen who left. Now we fight only for our children not to starve." He looked past her at the line of faces. Some were hard as flint. Others, younger, held a questioning, cautious hope. "They will never hire you," he said quietly. "Not all of you. Not like this." Nandi's gaze did not waver. "They can refuse," she said. "But first they must listen." She stepped closer, lowering her voice so that only he could hear. "You live between them and us," she said. "White like them. Alone like us. You give water and food without price. So we stand here and do not break this camp like dry branches." Caleb's mouth went dry. Behind him, the foreman shouted his name again, closer this time. "Get back here. You don't speak for us." Nandi's eyes narrowed faintly. "I do not ask him," she said. "I ask you. You think I have that kind of pull here?" he asked, almost laughing at the absurdity. She smiled then for the first time. It was small and tired and unexpected, like sunlight on old ice. "I think men follow the one who sleeps on the floor so a stranger may take the bed." He looked back at the camp. The foreman stood near the cookhouse, rifle in hand, jaw clenched. Men flanked him, some eager, some afraid. They had numbers, tools, buildings. The warriors in the trees had discipline and silence and an old, deep anger. Between those two forces stood a man who had wanted only to cut trees and keep his ledger balanced. Caleb took a breath so cold it burned all the way down. "What do you want me to say?" he asked her. "Tell them we are not ghosts," she said. "Tell them we bleed like they do and our hands no work. Tell them if they shoot they will see how many of us fall. And how many of them." He turned again, this time fully facing his own people. The foreman's eyes were sharp with fury. "Get away from them, Caleb," he shouted. "They step 1 foot closer, we open fire. They don't belong here." The word struck something in Caleb. A memory of his first winter in these woods. How the older men had laughed at his soft hands and city coat. How the cold had cut through every layer of his pride. How he had sat alone in this very yard, shivering, when an old French lumberman had dropped half his own stew into Caleb's bowl without a word. He remembered the man's words later, spoken around a pipe. "No one belongs here. We just last longer than others." Caleb stepped forward, hands spread a little, not high enough to look like surrender, not low enough to look like threat. "If you shoot," he called, voice carrying over the yard, "you won't make it to spring." A scoff rose from one of the men. "You gone soft, Caleb. They're just fighters who outlived an empire," Caleb cut in. "You think they'll be scared of a logging camp?" A few of the older men shifted uneasily. They had seen war. They knew the look of veterans dressed in rags. The foreman's face reddened. "You siding with them now?" he snarled. "I'm siding with whoever keeps the most men alive," Caleb said. "Ours and theirs." His heart hammered. His hands trembled slightly from the cold or fear or both. "You need cutters," he went on. "We lost 3 men last week to that log slide. 2 more are sick with the fever. The company keeps sending you orders and fewer men to fill them. These people want work. They know how to carry weight, how to follow orders. You don't have to like them. Just pay them. They'll feed their own and keep walking when others would quit." The foreman spat into the snow. "You really think the company's going to sign off on me hiring a band of foreign savages?" Caleb held up the bead. It caught a shard of pale light. "I think the company doesn't have to know exactly what shade a man's skin is when his name goes on a ledger," he said. "Especially if the logs keep coming down river on time." Murmurs rippled through the camp. Practicality held more power here than prejudice ever admitted. Men wanted less strain on their own backs. Fewer half-frozen days trying to make up for short crews. "They'll leave when the thaw comes," the foreman said, grasping for solid ground. "So do half our boys every spring," Caleb answered. "We still make it work." A long silence stretched between the two men and beyond them between the two crowds. Nandi waited without speaking. Her warriors stood like dark trees, breath drifting upward in slow white plumes. Finally the foreman lowered his rifle a fraction. Not much. Just enough to loosen the air. I'm not promising them wages, he muttered. They'll get room and board if they behave. If they cross any lines, they're gone. That's all I'm saying. Caleb looked back at Nandi. He'll house you, he translated, nodding toward the bunkhouses. Food. Warmth. In return you work. Hard. She considered this, then glanced over her shoulder. A man with graying hair and a scar down one cheek stepped forward. His eyes were sharp, measuring the camp like a battlefield. She spoke to him in Zulu, the words flowing low and quick. He answered in kind, his tone clipped, efficient. A leader, Caleb guessed. Or something close. When their brief council ended, Nandi turned back to Caleb. We work, she said. Through cold. Through thaw. Until we can move on. And if they cheat you? Caleb asked because he knew his own kind too well. Her gaze hardened. Then you tell us, she said. Since you stand between. The weight of that settled on his shoulders like another log. He realized suddenly that somewhere between the water barrel and this morning's snow, he had become the hinge on which two worlds would turn. He nodded slowly. I'll tell you, he said. Nandi extended her hand. It was a simple, direct gesture. No flourish. No bow. Just skin and callus and strength offered in plain sight. He placed the bead in her palm, closing her fingers gently around it. Instead of pulling away, she clasped his hand there, sealing something wordless. For a heartbeat, all he felt was the rough warmth of her grip and the steady beat of blood in his own thumb. The forest around them seemed to hold its breath. Then she let go. She turned and lifted her voice in Zulu, clear and commanding. The wall of warriors shifted, rearranging. Groups broke off, spearheads dipping. Some stacked their weapons in careful piles at the edge of the trees. Others moved toward the camp with measured steps, eyes watchful but not wild. The men of the camp parted reluctantly, forming ragged paths. Fear, curiosity, and resentment tangled in their faces. But they did not raise their rifles again. As the first of the Zulu men passed him, one glanced at Caleb. A young man, maybe 18. His eyes held the same question Nandi's had carried. What kind of man are you, standing here alone between us and them? Caleb didn't answer with words. He simply stood his ground, letting each side pass through the space his choice had carved. For the rest of that day the yard echoed with new voices. Commands shouted in two languages. The thud of axes and more hands. The creak of sleds pulled by men with unfamiliar songs on their lips. Caleb went back to his work among the pines, but nothing felt quite the same. The forest had always been cold and indifferent. Now it had become, somehow, the only place big enough to hold all this collision of histories and hunger. As he swung his axe, breath fogging the air, he glanced down the line. Nandi stood beside a massive pine, her coat thrown open now that sweat had begun to rise on her skin. She held a saw handle opposite one of the camp men, body braced, arms flexing as they pulled the blade back and forth through the living wood. Her movements were clean, efficient. She fell into rhythm easily, adjusting her step to match her partner's. When the tree finally groaned and tipped, crashing into the snow with a sound like distant thunder, she stepped back, chest heaving, and looked over at Caleb. Their eyes met once across the space. No smile. No nod. Just a shared understanding that none of this had been free. That every drop of water, every word spoken over cold ground, would have a cost yet to be counted. He wiped his forehead with the back of his wrist and moved to the next tree. The forest closed around them all, impartial and vast, while men from opposite ends of the world put their shoulders into the same winter. By nightfall the camp felt tighter, as if the air itself had shrunk. Lines had been drawn without anyone naming them. One bunkhouse now held the Zulu men, though a few slept outside under lean-tos they built from canvas and spruce boughs, claiming they trusted the sky more than strange roofs. Smoke from the cookhouse shifted between languages. English curses. Rough French. A few Ojibwe words from the guides. Now Zulu joined them, low and rolling, the consonants clicking softly like wood knocking against wood. Inside, the long tables groaned under the usual fare. Stew thick with potatoes and a few sad shreds of meat. Bread that fought back when you bit it. Coffee black as tar and just as forgiving. Caleb carried his tin plate to a corner, habit and instinct guiding him away from the loudest pockets of men. He set his cup down, feeling the eyes again. Not as sharp as morning. More tired now, dulled by labor. Suspicion still hung there, though coiled and patient. Nandi sat with her men along the far table. They ate with silent discipline, backs straight, spoons moving in unison. No one reached across another's plate. No one spoke with food still in their mouths. They might have been in a mess tent on campaign. A few of the camp men had been pushed down that way by lack of space. They sat stiffly among the warriors, shoulders drawn up as if afraid to touch. One of them, a broad man with red stubble, muttered something under his breath. His neighbor gave a nervous chuckle. Nandi heard it. Her eyes flicked up, sharp. The red-bearded man caught her gaze and smirked, lifting his spoon as if in a toast. "You lot eat like you're in church," he said loud enough for nearby ears. "Soup's not holy, you know." One of the Zulu men beside Nandi slowed his movements, spoon hovering. He glanced at her, waiting. She said nothing, just watched the red-bearded man with that same flat calm. Caleb felt the air in the room tighten. He put his cup down gently and rose. "Leave it, Caleb," a voice muttered from behind him. "Let the foreman handle it." He ignored them. His boots thudded quietly on the plank floor as he crossed the room. Conversation dipped around him like wind around a tree. He stopped beside the red-bearded man. "You got a problem?" Caleb asked. The man looked up, cheeks flushed from heat and temper. "Only problem I see is them taking up half our table," he said. "And you walking around like their steward." A few men laughed, rough and brittle. Caleb kept his voice level. "They're pulling their weight out there. Same as you." Redbeard snorted. "Is that what you call it?" Saw one of them standing there counting branches while the rest of us hauled. "Probably never seen snow before this week." "I have seen snow," a low voice said. Caleb turned. The warrior who spoke had the graying hair and scarred cheek from that morning. He sat across from Nandi, spoon resting on the table, gaze steady. He tapped his chest with 2 fingers. "Becky," he said. Then he pointed to the door. "Snow. Cold. But not as cold as British heart." A few of his men gave short, humorless huffs of agreement. Redbeard shifted, not expecting the man to understand. "I don't give a damn about his history," he said to Caleb, jerking a thumb toward Mbeki. "I care that I have to share my stew with a pack of—" Caleb's hand hit the table harder than he meant. Tin cups rattled. A spoon clanged to the floor. Every head near them turned. "You care that they remind you you're not the toughest thing walking," Caleb said, voice low and clear. "That's what this is." Redbeard's eyes narrowed. "You calling me a coward?" "I'm saying you've never watched your village burn from a war you didn't start," Caleb answered. "You've never been shipped like cargo then thrown out when the buyers got bored. They lived through that and still got up at dawn to pull saws beside you." He let the words hang there. They tasted bitter in his own mouth, because he knew he was also speaking to himself. Redbeard's jaw worked. The room held its breath. Then a different voice cut in. Dry. Roughened by years of shouting over river noise. "That stew getting cold, or you planning to throw it?" The foreman stood in the doorway, hand resting lightly on his belt, eyes taking in the whole scene. He hadn't drawn the pistol at his hip. He didn't need to. His authority sat on his shoulders like an old coat. "Sit down, Miller," he said to Redbeard. "You want to pick a fight, do it after a 12-hour shift when you can't lift your arms. See how brave you feel then." A few men chuckled. The tension shifted, not gone but reshaped. Redbeard, Miller, grumbled, but he dropped his gaze and shoveled a spoonful of stew into his mouth. The moment broke apart into smaller sounds. Tin scraping. Low talk. Sighs. The foreman's eyes lingered on Caleb. A warning lay there. And something else. A reluctant calculation. Caleb didn't bother reading it too closely. He returned to his corner and finished his meal in silence. When he rose to leave, Nandi stood as well. She crossed the room toward him, taller than most men there. Conversations dipped again. She didn't seem to notice. "You speak like Chief," she said quietly when she reached him. "I spoke like a man tired of pointless fights," he answered. She considered that, then gave one small nod. "In my home," she said, "a man who steps between blades is either fool or leader." "Which one am I?" he asked. Her eyes moved over his face, searching for something he wasn't sure he possessed. "You are still choosing," she said. Outside, the night hit them with iron cold. Stars burned sharp above the black teeth of the pines. Snow squeaked under their boots, the sound clear in the thin air. "Why did you come back with so many?" Caleb asked as they walked. "You could have come alone. Asked for work yourself." "Alone?" she repeated. "A woman alone here is meat." She glanced sideways at him. "You know that." He said nothing. She wasn't wrong. "And they had no work," she continued. "My people. They had anger and stories but no bread. I heard of camps in the north. Men said, they cut trees until their hands fall off. I thought, she shrugged slightly. Our hands not fallen yet. Must have been hard convincing them, he said, to follow you this far. They did not follow me, she said. They followed hunger. I walked first because I know how to talk to men like your foreman. Men who think they own all corners of the world they stand in. You spoke to many like him? Caleb asked. Her mouth tightened. Too many, she said. They reached the shadow of his lodge. Lantern light spilled from a gap in the doorframe, soft and yellow. The camp around them hummed with small sounds. Snoring from one bunkhouse. Laughter from another. The distant grind of someone sharpening a blade. Your men, he said, nodding toward the dark shapes near the tree line. They trust you. They know I will not waste their blood, she replied. That's trust, he said. She looked toward the bunkhouse assigned to her warriors. A low murmur rose from inside. Men adjusting to new walls. New breathing beside them. I should be there, she said. They do not like roofs. A faint smile touched her lips. They say listening to snow on a roof is like waiting for a drum that never beats. He almost smiled back. You sleeping there too? For now, she said. I do not take bed while others lie on floor. Sounds familiar, he said. She tilted her head. You forget, she said. You gave me your bed. He felt heat touch his ears despite the cold. I remember, he said. Doesn't mean it wasn't the only decent choice. There are many choices between decent and safe, she said. You must learn the difference. She stepped back, the snow creaking beneath her heel. Good night, Caleb. He watched her walk toward the bunkhouse, her tall form cutting a clean line against the snow. Men moved aside instinctively as she passed, even those who barely reached her shoulder. Alone in his lodge again, he sat by the stove, boots off, socks steaming slightly as they dried. He took the small ledger from the shelf. The candle guttered as he opened it. Names filled the pages. Men who had come and gone. Wages owed. Deductions for broken tools and lost days. He turned to the last page and hesitated. Slowly he wrote in a new line. Nandi, provisional. Negotiator. Guide. No wage yet. No rate. Just that single word. Provisional. He stared at the letters until they blurred, then shut the book. Snow fell again that night. Fine and steady. It softened every rough edge in the yard, blanketed the stacked logs, blurred the paths between bunkhouses. The forest took it all in without comment. Days turned into a pattern. Sweat in the daylight. Steam off bodies bent beneath loads of green timber. Breath in clouds. The rasp of saw teeth biting and retreating. The Zulu men worked hard. Harder than some of the camp's old hands. They learned quickly where to place their feet on icy slopes, how to read the mood of a tilted tree, when to step back and let gravity take over. They sang sometimes under their breath as they hauled. Rhythms in a language the forest had never heard. Slowly, a few of the other men began to match those rhythms. A hummed line here. A half-mumbled chorus there. Music moved where words could not. Miller avoided them at first. He stuck to crews that didn't share saw handles with the newcomers. But the foreman had his own logic. He sent him one morning to work with Mbeki on a stubborn patch of hillside. Caleb watched from down the slope. At first, every movement the two men made seemed misaligned. Miller pulled too fast. Mbeki too steady. The saw jerked and snagged. Shorter pulls, Caleb called. Listen to each other. Not the tree. They glared at him, then at each other. But gradually their rhythm found a groove. The saw began to sing instead of stutter. Chips of fresh-cut pine flew, pale against their dark coats. When the tree finally went down, both men stepped back at the same moment, same angle. Mbeki gave one short nod. Not friendly. A soldier's acknowledgement of competence. Miller spat into the snow and muttered, You pull decent for a man who thinks snow's new. Becky's mouth twisted. Almost a smile. You complain decent, he said. For a man who breathes so much. Caleb heard it and felt something in his chest loosen very slightly. Not peace. But the first splinter of possibility. At night, the bunkhouses held low pockets of talk. Stories traded over boots being mended and shirts patched. The Zulu men spoke of hills and rivers with names that tasted like song. Of cattle taken. Of kings who stood against red-coated lines and broke under gunfire. Some of the camp men listened as if to fairy tales. Others as if to warnings. Nandi often walked the yard between buildings, checking on her men, her steps sure even in the dark. She carried herself with the quiet weight of someone who had commanded before and knew it might be required again at any moment. She sometimes paused outside Caleb's lodge, a dark shape against his small window. Once he opened the door to find her there, snow on her shoulders. "You look tired," she said, stepping inside when he gestured. "Everyone does," he replied. "It's winter." She studied him. "There is more than winter on you," she said. "You carry something heavier." He turned to pick up the coffee pot, grateful for the excuse to face away. "Maybe I'm just thinking too much." "About what?" He poured into 2 tin cups, then set one before her. "Where this ends," he said. "Men like the foreman don't change just because the wind shifts. Company men will come. They'll see African fighters swinging axes in their lumber camp and they'll start worrying about order. About property. You fear them," she said. He sipped his coffee. It was bitter and burned his tongue. "I've seen what happens when men like that feel their control slipping," he said. "They don't bend. They break things." She wrapped her hands around the cup, listening. "In my land," she said slowly, "the British said, 'Sign this paper. Work our land. Pay our tax.' When our chief said no, they took our cattle, our fields, our women. They broke much. But not everything." "You lost your king," Caleb said gently. She looked at him over the rim of her cup. "You know more of us than you show," she said. "I read newspapers," he said. "Old ones. Wrinkled when they arrive. They talk about you like you're a line in a ledger. Native uprising suppressed. Colonial order restored. Then they move on to the price of wheat." "What do you read between the lines?" she asked. He held her gaze. "That people bled," he said. "And someone far away made money from it." Her eyes softened just barely. "Then you do not fear us," she said. "I fear what men will do to keep you in your place," he said. She set the cup down. "We have no place," she answered. "That is why we are here." The words sat heavy on the small table between them. A week later the first company man arrived. He came upriver in a narrow boat, wrapped in a coat too fine for this work. His boots shone despite the mud. He had a ledger tucked under one arm and a pen clipped to his vest as if it were a weapon. Caleb saw him from the log yard. The man's back was stiff as he stepped onto the icy bank, eyes scanning the camp with practiced distaste. "The inspector," the foreman muttered beside Caleb. "Early, damn his schedule." "You knew he was coming?" Caleb asked. "I always know when men who can fire me are coming," the foreman snapped. The inspector's gaze snagged almost at once on the roped stacks of logs. Satisfaction flickered there. Quantities impressed him. Then his attention slid further, toward the moving figures among the trees. He frowned. "Who are they?" he asked when the foreman met him halfway. His voice carried, too polished for this yard. "You've taken on new hands since last report." "Hard workers," the foreman said. "Came cheap. Strong as oxen. You can see from the numbers they get results." Caleb watched Nandi step out of the tree line, wiping sweat from her brow with the back of her wrist. She wore a flannel shirt now under her coat, sleeves rolled to her elbows. Her forearms shone with exertion, breath puffing in white bursts. The inspector's eyes widened almost imperceptibly. "Good God," he said. "They're Africans. Men as good with a saw as any you'll find," the foreman said. "And the woman she—" "A woman?" the inspector cut in, scandal prickling his tone. "You have a woman working in your crews?" "She knows how to talk to them," the foreman said. "Keeps them ordered. They listen." The inspector shook his head sharply. "This is irregular," he said. "Highly irregular. Imagine what the other camps will say if—" "The other camps will say nothing when they see how many logs we send," Caleb said quietly, stepping forward before he could think better of it. The inspector turned his head slowly, as if surprised a working man knew how to arrange words. "And you are?" he asked. "Caleb Ward," the foreman said quickly. "Been with us 5 years. Knows the woods like his own hands." "Then he should keep those hands on an axe," the inspector replied. "Not on matters of policy." Still, he studied Caleb with a little more care now. Evaluating. Deciding where he fit on his mental map of hierarchy and use. Nandi approached, eyes cool, sweat freezing at her temples. She stopped at a respectful distance but not too far. "You are the man who holds papers," she said to the inspector. "Yes." Her accent curled around the words. They still landed clean. The inspector blinked. "I beg your pardon?" "You decide if we stay," she said. No softness. No plea. Just statement. He drew himself up. "This camp is under company law," he said. "Labor must be sanctioned, wages recorded. I was not informed of any foreign contingents being employed here." Nandi glanced at Caleb, then back at the inspector. "We are not contingent," she said. "We are people." Becky had come to stand behind her shoulder. His presence was like a shadow given weight. Other Zulu men watched from among the trees, hands resting on tools. Their weapons, by unwritten agreement, remained stacked near the edge of the forest. Close enough to reach. Far enough to pretend peace. The inspector's mouth tightened. "You understand, madam, that this is not a charity operation," he said. "The company is not responsible for every displaced soul who wanders out of the bush." "We do not ask charity," Nandi said. "We ask work. We give you our backs, our hands, our time. You give us food and warm place. This is fair trade." "It is not customary," he replied. "Custom changes when winter comes," she said. Caleb almost smiled despite himself. The inspector did not. He turned to the foreman. "If the board hears I sanction the employment of armed African natives in a northern camp," he said, voice dropping, "my position will be in question. They will speak of safety. Of liability. We can disarm them," the foreman said quickly. "Lock away their spears and guns. Make it a condition of employment." Becky's jaw clenched. Nandi's eyes flashed. "Those weapons are for our protection," she said. "We have seen what happens when we give them up." Caleb stepped in, feeling the edge of something sharp underfoot. "There's another way," he said. "Pay them less. Call them temporary. Say they're under my charge. If anything goes wrong, I'll take the blame." The inspector looked genuinely amused now. "You are eager to throw yourself on the pyre, Mr. Ward?" he said. "I'm eager to keep the logs moving and the bodies from piling up," Caleb said. "If you drive them off at gunpoint, this camp will hear about it in every port downriver. Men will think twice before signing on next season. They'll wonder who else you'll decide doesn't fit." The inspector's gaze hardened. "Are you threatening me with rumor?" he asked softly. "No," Caleb said. "I'm reminding you of how fast stories travel when men are cold, bored, and angry." A long moment stretched. The only sounds were wind in the trees and distant chopping. Finally, the inspector exhaled through his nose. "Very well," he said. "They may remain. On condition their weapons are stored in the foreman's office. Access only with his permission. Wages at half rate, classified as unskilled assistants. If there is any trouble, I will order them removed and you, Mr. Ward, will carry that order out. Personally." Nandi's head snapped toward Caleb at that. Her eyes narrowed, weighing his reaction. Caleb swallowed. The taste of iron filled his mouth. "Agreed," he said. The inspector turned away, already done with them. "I expect your next shipment to reflect this enhanced labor force," he called over his shoulder. "And send someone to clean my quarters. The dust there is unacceptable." The foreman watched him go, shoulders sagging slightly with relief. Then he looked at Caleb. "You're a fool," he said. "But maybe the kind of fool I need." Left in the yard, Nandi faced Caleb fully. "You will carry the order," she said. "If he tells you to make us leave." "If there's trouble," he replied. "That's what he said." "There is always trouble," Becky grunted. Caleb rubbed a hand over his face. The cold stung his skin. "I bought you time," he said. "It's the best I could do." Nandi studied him with that measuring gaze again. "You tied yourself to us," she said. "Now if we fall, you fall." "Seems fair," he said quietly. "Considering I was the one who handed you water." Her mouth pressed into a thin line. "Then we must make sure we do not fall," she said. Behind her, the forest stood watching, tall and unsentimental. The snow underfoot answered no questions. It simply waited to see whose blood, whose sweat, would darken it next. If you enjoyed, please subscribe and comment what country you're watching from. See you in the next one.